So Pearl is the prequel or sequel, if you want to think of it that way, to Ty West's film X. Now, you might remember earlier this year we had a great little horror film come out from Ty West, who hadn't had any new horror films come out in quite some time, and X was just a brilliant throwback slasher type film that was evocative of like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was also very, very weighty. Like it had like a lot of great disturbing sequences and a lot of great kills, but also had a great theme about like the passage of time, the dwindling nature of youth, sexual desires that are repressed. So there was a whole lot going on in that film that I absolutely loved. So now we get Pearl, and Pearl we were actually teased. We actually had this film teased at the end of X, because usually you don't expect like mid-credit sequences from like A24 films, but then like surprisingly enough, like we got through the credits, and then here's a quick little advertisement for Pearl, which it takes place before the events of X, and it already had footage and everything. So it's like, oh man, they shot this recently. And as it turns out, as I found out later, it turns out, yeah, Ty West actually made this around the same time as X. I believe they said like he wrote like the screenplay within like 2 weeks, and then went into production really quick to explore more of the character of Pearl. Now, here's the thing. This is a prequel, but you do not need any knowledge, like, and Ty West has mentioned, but you do not need any foreknowledge of X. It kind of adds to it, but there's no like little like in jokes or stuff like that you have to understand what's going on in Pearl, which is great because Pearl actually stands well enough on its own as not just trying to replicate the same style as X. It feels like a much different film in a variety of ways. Like, we'll start off with like the obvious thing here is that it goes for, instead of going for the 70s like kind of like grindhouse format, it was all like gritty, kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This story is meant to take place during 1918, and they kind of film it to be more like classic Hollywood. Like they have like like the opening credits would have that kind of familiar typography. They use a lot of like kind of like wipes and like circle ins that you would see in like classic films. The settings were just picturesque and like beautiful and gorgeous, and even the soundtrack has this kind of like classic quality of like that kind of like lingering orchestra that you would get in like a lot of like very like classic Hollywood type films. So it's definitely got like a very distinct look here, and it was really cool to see Mia Goth return as Pearl. She played both Pearl and Maxine in the first film X, you might remember. So she played both a young person and an old person. So it's kind of interesting. You get to see her play an older version of this character and then show the younger version of herself as well. And she dominates that film. Like, if she was like an amazing surprise in X, she's the dominant force here in Pearl. And I think that's because she's given a lot to work with here, but also because she has to carry the story. Like the whole deal is that Pearl starts off as like like this innocent woman who just has great dreams and she wants to be a star. Like, one way to like refer to this film is it's almost kind of like the anti-version of A Star Is Born, where this woman has great dreams of becoming an actress and making it big, and then having them dashed away and just having them like eat her up. It's like it's interesting. It's kind of like if A Star Is Born was like the opposite, where her dreams didn't come true and she just went on like a killing rampage. Which to a degree you can kind of understand, because Pearl's life sucks. She lives on a farm where her husband is off at war and she suspects that he's died. She lives with a mother who's very strict about running her farm. She doesn't like allow Pearl to have any fun at all. Her father's catatonic, so she has to care for him at all times, and all pleasures feel like they're denied her. And this boils over, it boils over like immediately. You see this frustration in her eyes, and with how she like goes into these dream sequences, and also with how she just kills the farm animals for fun, which is a very telling sign. Like, you immediately see like this is going down a dark path, despite the kind of like almost almost kind of like dreamy, whimsical nature that like the first half of this film has. There's little like pepperings of like, yeah, here's some little aspects of like how she's not well and how she's gonna go on like a murderous streak here. So it's like, it's like I said, it's very much like the classic Hollywood stuff, but then juxtaposing it with disturbing scenes of violence, but also like sexual desires. Like there's at one point, I'll just say this: there's a scene that takes place in a cornfield with a scarecrow, and I'll just let you put two into it. She's in the field, she has a scarecrow, and she's very, very lonely. I'll let your mind fill in the blanks about what happens. I feel like I might have to, just because there's like a lot of surprises here. But also like just a lot of like great performances here. Like I really liked David Cornsweet as the projectionist that Pearl falls in love with. Like she has this love with film, and it feels like this projectionist is kind of going to be like her ticket into like another world and showing her a different side that she might that both intrigues her and terrifies her at the same time. So it's very interesting to see her kind of like pursue this relationship. And then you also have Tandy Wright, who plays Ruth, who's basically the competition. Like she's everything that Pearl wants to be. You know, she has a better life. She's a little bit, from the way that she's staged, she's a lot more beautiful. She's blonde. She essentially has everything that like a movie producer would be looking for. And so Pearl just kind of longs for this life, and she makes all these steps to kind of like make it happen, but also breaks a lot of rules and breaks a lot of limbs and burns a lot of people and chops a lot of people up and feeds them to the gator. Like you may remember in X, they had a gator that ate people, and yeah, that gator's still around, still eating people. Yeah, and I was surprised at just how gorgeous this film looks, and kind of like how it leans into its own style. Like at first, yeah, you can see it's definitely taking that classic cinema aesthetic, but the further it goes, it sort of develops a little bit of a style all its own. That by the time we get closer to the end of the film, like it takes some really interesting choices. Like we get this kind of like mirrored, like almost kind of like kaleidoscopic variation of shots where she's basically chopping people up and kind of like staging dinner with corpses and just going down these really dark paths, and staging it with this kind of like this eerie nature that kind of like, it's weird. Like the music has this great ability to transition between like this kind of like odd joyous whimsy to intensity, and that's very much present by like the ending shot where just Pearl stares you directly in the eyes with a smile that kind of like cracks and breaks as she holds it for the remainder of the credits. I guess where the film, like, and I know that like you're obviously going to want to compare it to like, you know, to X. How does it stack up next to X? Because that was a great film, and I would say that it's not better than X, and I think that's mostly because X has so much going on that there's a lot to like latch onto in that film and explore in terms of like the themes that are presented. Within Pearl, it feels like a much simpler story. Like there's not like a bigger focus on like, you know, like this longing. I mean, like Pearl's longing is the thing that drives this film, but there's not a lot of like whole other. We don't explore much of like the other characters. Like a lot of the other characters are mostly just obstacles for Pearl, which I think is fine. Like I think the key thing that needs to be stressed here is that X, you know, X is its own film and Pearl is very much its own film. It's very distinct. So you're kind of going to have to almost kind of like chop away like the distinction, like not be looking for like everything with an X, I think, to fully appreciate it. And to that degree, I would almost say like if you haven't seen X, you feel free to just go see Pearl first if you want. It might actually be interesting just to see what it'd be like to watch Pearl first and then to go watch X if you haven't seen it already. In either case, great double feature. I hope that the theaters start doing more double features with it. And just like I can't stress this enough, Mia Goth's performance here is just like it's the definite high point of the film. Like there's a great monologue by Mia Goth as Pearl where she just basically she just unloads all the stuff that wasn't said before, in this very like tearful, uneasy way that just you're just your eyes are locked on the screen. You cannot take your eyes off her. Especially because that scene ends with her chasing someone down with an axe and killing them in a rather long shot that kind of like goes out of the farm and kind of follows them in this somewhat brief foot chase where she's basically taking her time while her victim is just terrified that this woman in a dress is coming after her with an axe, which I gotta admit, Mia Goth looks amazing in that scene. Just coming out there with like a red dress and an axe and just hacking down this person who she feel has just kind of like ruined her entire life. It's just intense and just pitch perfect horror there. So yeah, like I really enjoy this film. It's not as great as X. Like I said, X has like, heavier themes to balance here, and it feels like Pearl is taking on just enough to make it work as a character study. Because apparently, like Wes said, this is, even if we don't make this film, at least we have like a decent character study, so we understand Pearl more. And I'm glad actually that this film got approved, so that now we can essentially have a trilogy. Like, as much like with X, they did announce at the end of this film there is a third part, and apparently it's going to take place in the 80s and follow more of Maxine, so that'll be interesting. At any rate, you're getting more of Mia Goth. This is her trilogy now, especially since she co-wrote this film in particular. So, yeah, Pearl is as like a horror character study with trying to, having this juxtaposed nature of like classic Hollywood and just grotesque horror. It really works, and it becomes its own film where it doesn't feel like it's just trying to replicate X, which is absolutely beautiful.